everyone. Really excited to have you up here today. So I know it's early and the coffee is just kicking in, so I thought I'd start out with some teacher humor. And I Googled some jokes for teachers. They're not very good. But here's what I found. Are you ready? Okay, what is the king of all school supplies? The ruler. Oh, you get it. Okay, here's another one. Why did the M&M go to school? Because he really wanted to be a smarty. Okay, I oversee our Department of Child Welfare and Attendance, so here's one of my favorites. Teachers who take class attendance are absent-minded. Let that one settle in. Okay, and finally, last one. What's a teacher's favorite nation? Explanation. Okay, so that's it for the humor. But speaking of explanation, I thought I should explain why we are here today. When I was a teacher, sometimes I would wonder, why are we here at this training or at this conference when I have so many things to do in my classroom? Now, I know none of you are feeling that way today, but I wanted to tell you a little bit about our why and the why of our conference, which is themed Building Relationships for Success. Today, you are going to walk away with a deeper understanding of childhood trauma and strategies and tools for implementing restorative practices in your classroom. But why? Why is this important? You know, I was thinking about my own why, and if I have to drill it down to one person, it would be Duane. Now, I'm going to tell you a little bit about Duane and his story because he is my why. And it's my hope that through Duane's story, you contemplate your own why and find great purpose and meaning in today's conference. Now, one thing you should know about Duane is that he never thought of himself as a good student. In fact, he always hoped the teacher wouldn't call on him to answer a question. In fact, one time, the teacher sarcastically referred to Duane as Einstein in front of the entire class when he got the answer wrong to a question. Sometimes Duane would misbehave so that he'd get kicked out of the classroom, and sometimes he would ditch school and he would spend the entire day hiking the Simi Valley area where he lived. Now, Duane's parents had 9 children in total, 3 that were from his mom and dad together. And if you asked him, Duane would tell you that his parents were poor, that he remembers times when the electricity was switched off, times when there was nothing in the refrigerator but a 6-pack, and parents who were not really interested in his education. In fact, many times in his junior high and early high school years, Duane would hitchhike miles and miles to get home from school. And then when he was 14, everything changed. Duane's dad died of cancer, and his mom moved him and his 2 younger siblings, the others were already grown, to Garden Grove, California. Now, while Duane still lacked confidence in his academics, he was curious. He loved to argue and debate topics, and he excelled at athletics. He was a varsity high school wrestler, and Duane managed to earn his diploma, his high school diploma from Rancho Alamitos High School in Garden Grove. This was in 1969, and Duane was about to turn 18 years old, a full-fledged adult. What Duane didn't realize is that he had suffered childhood trauma. Today, one of the sessions that you will attend is about adverse childhood experiences, also called ACEs. Now, there's been a lot of research about ACEs, and they tie back to a landmark Kaiser study. Basically, ACEs fall into 3 categories: abuse, neglect, and household dysfunction. There's a 10-question assessment to determine your ACE score. Duane had an ACE score of 7, which is extremely high. And Duane didn't know how to cope with his trauma. In later years, his wife would often remark that he never got over his childhood. Adverse childhood experiences, or ACEs, are linked with a higher risk of many things later in adult life, such as depression, anxiety, sleep disturbances, heart disease, high blood pressure, high cholesterol, stroke, drug or alcohol dependence, suicide attempts, cancer, liver disease, and the list goes on and on. The more adverse childhood experiences that one has, the more significant likelihood that a person has of experiencing difficulties with his or her mental or physical or overall well-being later in life. 1 out of every 5 people with 7 or more ACEs will attempt suicide. And Duane was one of these 5. When he was in his mid-20s, Duane made an attempt on his life, but he was unsuccessful. So Duane went on with life. He got married, had 2 kids, passed his contractor's license to become a house painter, put his wife through college, became a 2nd-degree black belt, taught karate to kids, and all of the other things in between. But through it all, the trauma never really left. On the outside, it looked like Duane had a nice life, but on the inside, he suffered so much. Physically, Duane looked like the picture of health, and yet at age 64, he had a stroke. It was as if he were a living statistic. An ACE score of 4 or more increases one's risk of stroke by 285%. Duane then made a 2nd attempt on his life and was again unsuccessful. He went into intensive therapy and counseling, and after many months, he seemed back to normal. Well, his normal. But on October 5th, 2016, all of that changed. Duane made a 3rd and final attempt on his life, and this time he succeeded. His 63-year-old wife came home from work to find him hanging from the rafters of their garage, and she was directed by 911 to cut him down, which she did. And I know all of this because Duane was my dad. Duane was my dad, and he killed himself. And it has been exactly 2 years and 3 days since his suicide. And this is the first time I have told my story to anyone I work with, and certainly in a public setting such as this. In fact, it was just 4 days ago that I met with each of my 2 bosses to tell them the story and what I would be speaking about today. I was very close to my dad, but no one I worked with knew about his suicide. But today I am speaking out because Duane is my why. A teacher's time is precious, and a teacher's work is endless. So I knew if I was asking you to be open-minded and engage in a full day of professional development, then I better have a why that was genuine and authentic. And this is about as real as it gets. But there's another why, and that's why I am telling my story. Several months ago, I was talking to one of our school board members, and he asked me how many of our students in Fullerton commit suicide. And I told him that none of them do, but that beyond 8th grade, we really have no way of tracking it. Then I thought of my dad, and I realized that Rancho Alamitos High School in Garden Grove would not have known that he had taken his life. My parents lived in San Diego, and my dad's story never made it beyond our family and closest friends. And this made me wonder, how many former FSD students have attempted suicide or spent their adult lives muddling through childhood trauma, especially since the symptoms of a high ACE score manifest later in life? The Center of Disease Control and Prevention reported that an ACE score of 4 or more decreases one's life expectancy by 20 years and makes one twice as likely to die by the age of 65. My dad died at the age of 65. The statistics are unsettling and eerie to me because my dad's story aligns perfectly with the data and research. And then there's another statistic that troubles me even more. CNN reported that a person is 4 to 6 times more likely to attempt or complete a suicide when a first-degree relative has committed suicide. 4 to 6 times more likely. And a first-degree relative is defined as a parent, child, or sibling. And suddenly, I became a part of the statistics. In fact, on the 1-year anniversary of my dad's suicide, October 5th, 2017, I was sitting in an educational leadership team meeting, and the presenter was sharing about suicide and how suicide runs in families. It was such a strange feeling, and it was too close to home to be a coincidence. I sat at that training in silence, and I texted my mom. And for the first time, I felt a prompting that maybe I needed to have the courage to speak out and tell my story. And then 3 days ago, this past Friday, October 5th, 2018, on the 2-year anniversary of my dad's suicide, I was here in this room setting up for this conference that I was responsible for related to mental health and restorative practices. The prompting I felt was now a solid conviction to speak out. And I am here today before you because I felt called and compelled to tell my story. The thought of being up here has terrified me. For so long, I was ashamed by the stigma of mental health. I was especially ashamed because I spent my whole life hearing that I was just like my dad. For example, when my mom admires something about me, like my persistence or focus or different way of thinking, she would lovingly remark, "You're just like your dad." And then, when I did something that was not as admirable, like showing a lack of patience or being too competitive, she would also remark, "You're just like your dad." And so, I had to come to terms with what that meant for me. I adored my dad, and his death broke my heart. But I would not be lying if I said that I did not feel some anger towards him for making a decision that would become a part of my history, my medical record, and my story. This was not the legacy that I had expected or wanted. The death of a parent is hard at any age. But beyond grief and loss, a suicide adds another dimension of emotions, uncertainty, questioning, and self-examination. I look at my mom differently now because I really do not know how she had the mental strength to physically cut my dad down from the rafters of the garage. And after my dad died, I would walk into her garage and I would stare at the spot. And I would wonder what he thought and what he felt in those final seconds. Did he feel regret, repentance, relief? And then there were the things that Duane's family felt. My mom could no longer stand living in their house. My parents had worked their whole life to build a small dream house that my mom could no longer stomach. My brother immersed himself in work and business trips and left his wife and baby home alone for weeks at a time. And I held it all inside until my insomnia became so bad that I needed to see my doctor. Healing slowly came, and it took a different form for each of us. My mom sold their dream house and bought a small little house that she loves. My brother found his way back to work-life balance and will be welcoming baby number 2 this December. And I reclaimed my health and took my husband, who's here today, and myself on a dynamic health and fitness journey that has resulted in us losing over 100 pounds together. And what my mom and brother and I have is resiliency and positive coping skills. And Duane did not have this. I did not realize it at the time, but the symptoms of my dad's ACEs bubbled up in different ways. For example, I mentioned that my dad was a house painter. Well, on rare occasions, he would have a commercial property to paint. And somehow, when I was 14, my dad got me, a friend of mine, and my brother to help him paint a warehouse. I thought it was really fun and interesting because I learned how painters use a string chalking device to paint a straight line. My friend, on the other hand, had a different take on the experience. She was a newer friend at the time. We had maybe known each other for about a year. And she called me that evening and she said, "Are we going to talk about what happened?" I didn't know what she was talking about. But then she proceeded to tell me how scared she was at my dad's anger outbursts, and how when he threw things, she felt frightened. She came home and told her mom all about this. And I saw my dad through her eyes. I had been relatively sheltered and grown up around the same family, friends, and neighbors who all accepted this is just the way that Duane is. We knew he had outbursts and would yell, throw things, etc., but it was never directed at us. It was like a child's tantrum that would pass after it ran its course. The sad thing is that it really was a tantrum, rooted somewhere deep in Duane's childhood. My husband was shocked and upset the first time he witnessed one of Duane's outbursts. Duane and my husband were working on a project at my house. And the way my husband tells the story is that my dad dropped a screwdriver and went into a 10-minute tantrum, calling out things like, "Why? Why me?" My husband was baffled. He said, "Your dad literally dropped a screwdriver and went off." And somehow that must have been a trigger for him, and he never learned a positive way to cope. The good thing is, and the reason that we are here today, is because children and teenagers can learn resiliency. They can learn positive coping strategies. And a big part of that is having trusted adults who can help them recognize their trauma and build positive relationships with them. Hence the theme of our conference, Building Relationships for Success. You have an impact on the future of students like Duane. No one is going to send you a report. You are not going to log into the California dashboard and see the outcome. But one day, a boy who becomes a man, who becomes a husband and a father and a grandfather, might learn to cope because of you. And you might change the legacy that he leaves his family. I do not think Duane ever really wanted to take his life. And I am going to close with a letter that my dad wrote to me. I was maybe 14 or 15 at the time, just a couple of years older than your students are today. I had gone off to a youth retreat at church, and at the end of the retreat, we were all handed surprise letters of love and encouragement that our parents had written. And I'm going to read the letter that my dad wrote to me. And you will see the unconditional love he felt as a parent, how he loved his daughter, and how he saw me with eyes that only a parent can possess. Here's the actual letter. Helene, my girl, I wanted to write you a letter and say a few things that I don't tell you. First of all, I love you with all of my heart. You're the absolute best daughter anyone could have asked for. You were made to order. I wouldn't change a thing about you. You're beautiful, smart, funny, witty, talented, and have a great personality. In other words, perfect. Well, almost. I know that I talk about you when you were little and how neat you were and all, but I'm just as crazy about you now. When you were born, I couldn't imagine such a little angel being born to me. And when I first held you, I knew I was the luckiest father in the world. My life was changed forever. And as I have watched you grow and change through the years to become such a fantastic young lady, I keep loving you more and more. You affect many people's lives. You have added a lot of joy to a lot of people, but most of all to me. I am so proud of you. It seems like everything you attempt you excel at. What a pleasure I've had watching you along the way. I may not have shown it, but I wanted to tell everyone that you were the most talented person in the world. But more than talent and beauty and personality, I love just you. It won't matter to me what you do in life. If you're a movie star, or a waitress, or a housewife, or whatever, I want you to realize that there isn't anything I wouldn't do for you. I will always want to protect you and help you whenever I can. I don't know about acting, singing, or poetry, but I do know that you're the very best thing that has ever happened to me. I want you to go after whatever you want in life. And if all of your dreams don't come true, which I think they will, then I'll always be there for you. Love, Dad. This is not a letter written by a dad who wanted to choose suicide over his family. My dad loved coming to watch me speak and perform. He wanted to always be there for me. He wanted to always love and protect me. So he's my why. He is why I have stood before all of you this morning, uncomfortably vulnerable to tell his story, which is my story. And then there's you, each of you. You have your own story, and the stories of hundreds and perhaps thousands of students. And these stories are powerful, and they matter. So may you go out today assured of your why and what you stand for. And I stand for freedom, redemption, and the courage of my convictions. And I stand over the stigma of mental health. And I stand over the statistics that I now represent. And I choose life. And I choose to live it boldly here today. Thank you so much.